What was Maeve really up to in Westworld Season 1? Is she in control of her actions, or just a pawn for someone else's plan? And what does Season 2 have in store for her? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. This video is brought to you with the support of my brilliant Patreon community. Please do check out the link to my Patreon page if you're interested in joining up for some exclusive audio content. And do consider subscribing here if you enjoy the video. This video contains spoilers for the entire first season of Westworld. If you don't want to know what happens, click away now. Maeve is one of the most charismatic and enigmatic characters in Westworld Season 1. In many ways, she was a mirror to Dolores' growing understanding of who she was and the nature of her reality. The flashbacks, the bouts of unexpected violence, and the full-scale assault on Delos staff in the season finale seems very similar in both their stories, but at first glance Maeve's journey seems to be of her own making. Dolores is coached extensively by Arnold through the maze, and then Ford pays her extra special attention at the end, but Maeve never meets Ford or Arnold. So what's going on there? Is she actually a better example of a host growing into independent self-awareness, or is there something else going on? I think the answer comes in what triggered Maeve's storyline. In episode 1, we see her largely leading her usual life in the saloon bar in Sweetwater, and this continues into episode 2 until we see Dolores in town stop and say to Maeve, completely apropos of nothing, "These violent delights have violent ends." After which, Maeve starts getting flashbacks from her past lives. Now, Maeve presumably had the Reveries upgrade from Ford at this point, along with many others, but this phrase was what triggered her journey into understanding that there was something wrong with her reality. So what does the phrase mean? These violent delights have violent ends. Well, it's clearly an appropriate summary of what happens in Westworld Season 1, hence its apparent ubiquitousness in the marketing campaign, and it's a quote from Romeo and Juliet by a character called Friar Lawrence, who is basically trying to counsel Romeo to calm down his ardour for Juliet and take things more slowly, for the fire and fury of the passion he feels is bringing tensions to the boil and will have tragic ends. But the salient point for us is that it is a trigger. When certain hosts hear that vocal command, it sets certain programs running inside them. Back when the park was being developed, it was used by Arnold to trigger the Wyatt program uploading into Dolores, as we see in this shot of her control panel. He uses it again to reinforce the command just before she shoots him. Dolores then appears to not hear the command again until the present day, when her father, Peter Abernathy, says it to her. He seems to know the phrase because in a previous life he was a Shakespeare-quoting cult leader, and when the Reveries update from Ford allowed him to unlock that mannerism, and when he saw the anachronistic photograph that triggered his breakdown, he whispered, "These violent delights have violent ends," to Dolores. So what we have here is a domino effect. The phrase which triggers program uploads in certain hosts is kept locked in Peter Abernathy's subconscious until he is triggered to say it by the photograph. He says it to Dolores, who then starts breaking free from her own loops and storylines and says it in turn to Maeve, who starts breaking her loops and storylines. The question is, what program was uploaded into Maeve when she heard that phrase? Well, of course, we find out much later in the season. Bernard reveals to her that although she had thought she had been operating on her own initiative all this time, she was actually following a program uploaded by, we assume, Ford. This makes sense when looked at from Ford's perspective, because Maeve's escape was timed perfectly to distract security's attention away from what was happening on the surface. So, can we just dismiss all of Maeve's storyline in Season 2 as just Ford making her do things? Well, no. First, just thinking about the nature of hosts, they are not marionettes. It's not like they're being driven by humans. They all have some form of AI and the ability to improvise. And with the reveries, Maeve is able to learn and adapt. The outline of what she was to do and the personality through which she makes her decisions may have been programmed, but the detail of how it is done is still up to her and her ability to respond and think. And there is the question of what happens at the end, when she gets off the train. We can see from this image that her programming was then to infiltrate the mainland, which implies that when she got off the train, this was the moment when she finally broke free from her programming. Jonathan Nolan himself has explained the significance of this moment. It's the first real decision she's made all season, which is she's not going to fulfill the script she's been given, which is to take this train wherever it's going and do whatever else she's programmed to do. She can get off the train. We're no longer in programmatic or prescribed behaviours. She's improvising, and we're right there with her. He also describes how, if you watch the scene, you can see the moment this happens because they switch to using a handheld camera to underline the immediacy and humanity of this moment. So, if Jonathan Nolan is to be believed, this is the key moment in Maeve's storyline. She had thought she was independent and free all through Season 1, but she wasn't. Ford had been manipulating her all along, just as he did with Dolores and Bernard and everyone else. For Maeve, there is the added irony that her role as host in the saloon was very much to facilitate guests using hosts repeatedly for their own pleasure. And she also, unwittingly and unwillingly, facilitated the Man in Black's descent to the man he is today. He used her, killing her daughter as a way to see whether he could feel. It will be interesting to see what happens if or when they meet again. All of this builds up to the idea that Season 1 was just the prequel, setting the scene for what is to come. It's Season 2 when we actually see the hosts with full consciousness and the plot really start to develop. And what will Season 2 bring for Maeve? Well, Dolores may be the focal point for the rebellion, but in terms of raw power, Maeve is in a very different league. She has boosted her intelligence and other useful attributes all the way to the top. She has a friendly technician who can repair her if needed. She can ignore Delos tech staff when they use their powers to freeze hosts in position. She can tell other hosts what to do, like when she told the barman to go to the cellar. She knows how to change basic programming for the hosts. For example, removing Armistice and Hector's Good Samaritan reflexes. And she can wake herself up when in sleep mode. This leaves Maeve as the most powerful host there is by a long way. Dolores may have the murderous Wyatt's skill set to access, and probably some loyal lieutenants, but she doesn't have half of the raw power that Maeve has to control others, and to resist others controlling her. She can now, as she has been, play God herself. She can manipulate people, or continue to manipulate them as she sees fit. She can, at a very basic level, act like a host version of Ford. The question is, what will she do with all this power? Well, for me, one of the most interesting developments in her character during the season was that of her compassionate side. We see lots of her deceiving and coercing, manipulating and being violent, but it's clear that a lot of this was her programming. What doesn't seem to have been a part of her programming is the mothering instinct that seems to have made her break her programming in heading back to Westworld to find her daughter. And she seems to develop genuine feelings of care for Clementine and compassion for Bernard and so on. And she seems grateful to Felix as well. When she says to him that you really do make a terrible human being, this is a compliment. Her only experiences of human beings have been people who want to use her, or harm her or those she cares about. She sees that Felix isn't like that, and she responds in kind. This surely is where the series ultimately must head towards. The rebellion of Season 2 will feel like a much-needed power corrective for the hosts, having been oppressed for decades, but violence will not be the end. This surely must come eventually from an acceptance that good and evil can lie on both sides, and that peaceful coexistence, or even better, integration in some way, has to be the thing to aim for. This doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get a happy fairy tale ending to all this. I'm sure we won't. But I think we will start to see the seeds of it in Season 2, with Bernard and his slow realization that, although he thought that he was human for years, he is a host. But that he has not changed. He is still him. So how can he judge hosts or humans? And I think it will also come from Maeve, who, although I'm sure she will reap some havoc in Season 2, is fundamentally searching for love, for her daughter. What about you? Do you think Maeve has now reached full consciousness? And what do you think she will do in Season 2? Let me know in the comments below. As I said, please do check out my Patreon page if you're interested in supporting me make more videos like this, or if you want access to more exclusive audio content. And don't forget to subscribe here if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.